Um, I wanted to just talk you through some of the creative communication skills that you've acquired on this module. Um, in your sketchbook, you're required to write reflections on each project. These reflections are designed to help you to, if you want to try and get some kind of work experience or placement. And in those kind of situations, you get asked questions about what you've learnt, how you overcame challenges or your own biases, etc. And they want to know what skills and knowledge you offer. And essentially, they don't want to try and decode what you have done. So they don't want to know that you did a project about YouTube and then you did a project on digital realities. They don't want to try and decode what that might mean for them. They want you to be able to explain it and then say, for example, I did this project in YouTube, or for example, I wrote this thing about art and design and media in context, and use that as an example of a particular skill that they're interested in. So I'm just going to run through some of the skills that you've acquired, and that will hopefully help not just in what you have to write in your sketchbook reflections, but also, if you're trying to get these work experience placements, which I do recommend that you do. All the previous media and com students that have tried to get work experience from the very start have ended up walking into work pretty much at the end of year 3. So in the first year, you might be just trying to get a couple of days here and there, a week here and there, in lots and lots of different places, different types of creative industries. In the second year, you might be able to get a couple of weeks, and then come the third year, you might be getting something a little bit more substantial. So this short presentation should help you reflect. You probably didn't even realise that you'd had the opportunity to learn so much, actually. Of course, obviously, whether you learnt any of this is largely up to you and the effort that you put in. But I have to say that overall, I'm happy with this group, the efforts you've been putting in, and how you've grown over the year. So if we make a start, I'll start with sector knowledge. So in looking at the creative industry sector, the knowledge that you've acquired is about news organisations. You've learned about the political spectrum. So if you weren't particularly political before, you've learned about the political spectrum. You've learned about organisation of business, how they kind of have vertical organisation, horizontal organisation, how small businesses might try and work within that, how lots of things are held by holding companies and how this makes a difference to the kind of work that's output. You've learnt about the advertising and marketing sector, a little bit about how they create work and how they kind of dovetail with each other. And you've learned something about branding and identity sector as well, in order to create a tone of voice for something, for example. And branding and identity is a different sector to advertising and marketing. You've learned about the use of research and how that creates differentiation for all of these sectors, all of the sectors that I'm talking about within this creative industries sector, the wider creative industries sector. You've learned about communities and different communities, how they kind of identify themselves and how they get identified. And you've learned about communicating to these communities of users, which is important for all the different industries within this sector. You've learnt how visual languages are used to communicate. So again, part of this is branding and graphics. Part of it might be to do with digital visualizations. Part of it might be to do with photography or filmmaking. All of these things are visual languages, and you've learned how to communicate with those as well as the written languages. You've learned about economics in media. None of this works without money. So all of this whole sector, the economics of it is incredibly important. And you have been learning about new business and working models, particularly within the kind of social media and YouTube sector. And in the zine, although that's not necessarily a new type of business, you could set up a new business as a zine or an online zine, as well as these more kind of digital platforms. So next we'll talk about vocational skills, which is probably the thing that you thought you were going to come and do at university, but actually is only one of the things that you're going to be learning. So, big part of it, InDesign, clearly, and you owe it to yourself to learn InDesign as well as you can. So it's a skill that you can put on your CV. You've learned about persuasive writing, really important part of lots of content. It's not, it's a small part of journalism because you want to write emotively, but not necessarily persuasively. But it will help you, that combination of formative writing, persuasive writing, and emotive writing, trying to work out what a hook is and how to draw a particular audience into your story, what they think is interesting to them, and how you use particular strategies within discourse about, number of words, length of words, how often you have to explain an idea. That kind of thing will be really useful for any of you that are looking to do the journalism module, but certainly persuasive writing for any content creation is really important. You've learned formal writing, so again, this is good for journalism, but it's also good for if you ended up in an agency which required more formal writing. You might end up, in a branding agency writing some brochure stuff, but you might end up in an HR department, in a media organisation. You could be in all sorts of jobs. I mean, that's the joy of a media and comms degree, but you have to be able to not just write persuasively, but you also have to know when you have to write formally. Verbal presentation, big vocational skill. There aren't many jobs in this sector that don't need verbal presentation of ideas. And you've all been working on that pretty consistently in Creative Comms and quite possibly all your other modules as well. Visual presentation, many of these sectors require visual presentations. Now, they might not require you to do it when you're just a junior, but certainly the further up the ladder you go, the more you're going to have to do a visual presentation. And that might start actually much, much quicker than you're expecting. So this, that you've been practicing a visual presentation alongside a verbal presentation, is really important vocational skill. Strategic communications really are intrinsic to all parts of this sector now. How are you going to communicate strategically, get across your ideas? How's this content going to be structured and go out? This is important in TV, it's important in news, it's important in branding, it's important in advertising, having some kind of strategy. So you've all understood, because you've had to explain it over and over, what your strategy is. Not just what you're doing, but what your strategy is about it. Content generation. You've all learnt to create content on multiple platforms, formats, and you've had to do it for different projects very quickly. So you do know how to create content. You've learned about social media, photography, filming, so these various vocational skills. I mean, how particularly strong you are in any of these things depends on how much you were involved in these in each of your projects, but there's certainly things that you have some insight into now. The application of analysis. You might not have thought this was a vocational skill, but it is very much one. You cannot create strategic communications without having analysed what's gone before. And hopefully this process, the way that you've done Creative Comms, has shown you that analysis, research, the kind of research, analysis, brainstorming, strategy, creation of things, visual presentation and verbal presentation is part of one big, locked up output. And you can't really just provide one without the other. So the application of analysis is a key vocational skill. And you've learned some basic graphic design. You're not on a graphic design degree, but you all, we live in a very visual culture. So you all need to have some inkling of how you might have to quickly put together some kind of brand identity or a visual identity or a logo design, or put together some images that could describe something, or create some visualization of data. You might be fortunate to be in a company that has graphic designers, and then this knowledge is about how you might brief them, or you might actually be somebody that's supposed to get on and make it yourself. Data analysis and visualization, that's part of graphic design, but it's also part of data journalism. So what is the information that you know? How do you analyze this information, so you have kind of numbers, and you can create a visual story out of this, one that draws people in and they actually understand the point that you're trying to make. And you saw how difficult it was in the news media brief, but this is something that you can certainly work to develop. So on to academic knowledge. You've extended your academic knowledge as well, and you've had an introduction to lots of things. So this isn't in-depth knowledge about any of these things. So you had an introduction to cultural theory, but you haven't had this in-depth knowledge about it. But you do actually know some of the key players now, and how they work, how their theories work with each other and against each other, and how things are only theories. So that when you're with Hannah in the second year and she's introducing cultural theory in much greater depth to you, you can think, actually, yeah, I do know Stuart Hall very briefly. I do know Adorno very briefly. These people that whose ideas have informed cultural theory, you've had an introduction to that. And the same with economic theory. So, we've been talking about Marxist analysis, and that's not to create a room full of Marxists, but because it's still one of the best ways of analysing capitalism. And capitalism is the society in which we live, and the economic structure that we live under. So understanding how that works and how that affects the kind of work that's being made, how that affects YouTube content entrepreneurs, how that affects social media or zines or advertising, or in fact news, is really important to this sector. But it's important to your academic knowledge. This base of understanding will go into your advanced projects or dissertations in the third year, as well as any essays and understanding of anything else in the second year. Introduction to audience studies, really important. No point in making anything unless you've got an audience for it. Otherwise, you're just making fine art for yourself. So you have to know about audiences, how you talk to audiences, how they research, how they identify themselves, if you can call something an audience. There's a whole range of information around this. Introduction to mass communications theories. So we went over that when we were talking about advertising in the lectures. Really essential for you to know, because a lot of the things that you'll be working on are mass communications. If you end up in social media, then they're not necessarily mass communications. They're a slightly different type of communication, as we talked over when we were doing those lectures. But mass communication theories are important for you to understand as part of the media sector. Introduction to branding theory. We touched on it. We didn't go very deeply into it, but you have some insight into how and why these things are created and why they're so impactful. An introduction to some of the theories surrounding advertising, why we're persuaded to do things, how it's how we come to think of these representations as normal, how semiotics is used, a whole set of other theories that surround advertising and promotions. Also, introduction to theories of visual communication. You've had a look at, vocationally, at creating some visual things, but there are theories behind these things, and why they work, and why you might take certain approaches, and also an introduction to subcultures and how they work against the hegemony or work alongside the hegemony, kind of subvert it. All of this kind of knowledge, very important going forwards. Introduction to business models, that's part of your academic knowledge and understanding of this sector. So all of those things, important going forwards, they form a basis of knowledge for you. Research skills. You've learned a bunch of research skills. You spent a lot of time researching with me. Very, very fast paced, but you did learn these things. So you've learned some basic semiotic analysis, and we did this in news media. But you've done it kind of, in a few different places along the way, but particularly in news media. You've learned some basic narrative analysis, so you applied that as well in news media. Basic discourse analysis, so we looked at that in news media as well, but that's appeared here and there over a couple of the different projects. You've done some online secondary research, and that was over probably most of the projects. Audience research. So you used multiple methods in your audience research, and you actually did this very early on. So audience research is a whole kind of area, but the methods in it to understand how you might work out what audiences think are many. So some of you learned about focus groups, others learned about interviews, others learned about online surveys, and then we all shared as a group the learning that you had from that. So audience research skills are something that you've acquired. Obviously you'll develop these, that you just learned them at first year level, and you'll develop these as time goes on. Digital ethnographic research, I bet you didn't know the word for that. That's what you've been doing with your buzz listening for social media, digital ethnographic research. You are researching what people have to say, but without actually meeting any of them. They're on forums. They're posting things in their own personal live streams. They're in all sorts of platforms. And this is ethnographic research, going to where the person is. Just happens to be a digital space. You've used a bunch of visual research methods as well, mostly in photography over a couple of the projects. So particularly with things like your little walk that you posted on Padlet. Photography is a powerful visual research method. What can you learn about how people behave? What can you learn about how people, what people are doing within the photographs that you take, particularly if they're documentary rather than staged? But it's a powerful research tool. Qualitative research in your interviews, and this was particularly evident in all of your zines where you interviewed people for the content to put in it. But obviously some of you did that in audience research. So some of these methods, like interview as a method, are used in various ways, but these are all also different methodologies. You've learned how to do literature reviews, and this has been very much so in the final project, the YouTube project, in which you're having to create a report. So that is the analysis of academic texts that you're reading. And also content analysis. So we did content analysis in order to generate the work for your data visualization in news media, but also we've come back to it in the YouTube videos where you're creating content analysis of what the various other YouTubers are doing. On to soft skills, and this is one of the things that employers are often most interested in, although they don't necessarily want you to talk about it so much, but they want you to evidence it in the examples. Sorry, just having a sip of coffee. So soft skills, teamwork, massively, massively important for what they want to know, that you can work in a team. Various people are having different requirements, and you are able to do this with no problem. They want to know you can come and do this. You aren't just somebody that wants to work by themselves. Interpersonal communication, hugely important in teamwork. So even if you're working by yourself within a place, you're also part of a larger team. And this larger team is a group that needs to be communicated with. And your skill set at this, being able to do it with some sensitivity, not being overbearing, also being able to do it in a timely fashion. All the stuff that you're actually marking each other on, a lot of this stuff is stuff that you're marking each other on in the peer assessment all the way through the year. Negotiation. Important that you are able to negotiate within a team to run with your idea, but also that you're able to negotiate within a team that you maybe include part of your idea in somebody else's idea. All of this stuff requires good negotiating skills because, you know, nobody's a dictator, so you can't just have things the way that you want them in every project. So these negotiating skills are really important. Presentation, they want to know that you can present things. You don't just shuffle around looking at the floor, not being able to say the ideas that you've had. Working to tight deadlines, really important. A key part of industry is they've got a job, it needs to be done by whatever date it is. They're really not interested in the fact that you couldn't get on the bus in time, that you didn't wake up, that you had a cold or a hangover. They don't want to know any of that. They want to know that you can work to tight deadlines, get the work done on time. And again, all of these projects, particularly in Creative Commons, where you've had such tight deadlines, these are examples you can bring. You know, we had to do this as a group project within 4 weeks, and we had to do all of these various things in order to fit to this deadline. Becomes a great example. Punctuality and attendance. Boring, I know, but being able to attend, being able to be prompt, really important for business, same as it's important for the university. And without doing these things, you just miss all the information at university side. But without doing these things in a job, they will just sack you. So punctuality and attendance, important. Empathizing with communities you don't know. You're not going to be talking to yourself endlessly. You have to be able to empathize with communities of users. So all of a sudden you have to provide materials for the over 75s. You're not over 75. You have to be able to empathise with them, their interests, the kind of visual language that they will be attracted to, the kind of persuasive language and examples that they'll be attracted to, not you. So empathising with these communities that you don't know, a refugee community as well, for example, really an important skill. So, again, you can draw on the examples from Creative Commons. Working on your own unconscious bias. This is key. This is one of the reasons why I created groups where everybody was mixed up and didn't sit at first with the groups that they automatically sat with in that first lesson. So you all turned up, sat with the people for whatever reason. Maybe you knew them before, or maybe you felt comfortable sitting with them, or maybe it was entirely random. But you can rest assured you all got moved from wherever you'd sat in the first place. And that's because we all have an unconscious bias. And I explained this to you at the very beginning. And we don't realise that we have. And we tend to sit with people that we kind of recognise from our own lives. So maybe we've gone and sat with somebody that we think will be nice because they remind us of our best friend at school. Or we're sitting with people that look like they play football because we play football. So we assume that they'll have kind of same jokes and behave in the same way that we do. And this forms, and on a kind of more worrying level, we might have unconscious bias in terms of gender or sexuality or ethnicity. So all of these things we have to work through, and it's the job of the university to make sure that we all do work through these things, and it's your own job to have to work through these things. So being able to work with all sorts of people in any kind of a team and challenging your own unconscious bias about these things is really important. So those are the soft skills that you've acquired. In addition, learning by doing. That was the entire way that Creative Commons was created, the way I developed it and designed it. You learn by doing. The fact that you're able to do this is exactly what industry want. They want you to be able to go in somewhere, you don't really know what you're doing. You learn by getting on with it. You don't learn by somebody having to give you a manual on how you have to think about doing that project and then you get a bunch of ticks whether you've done things to a certain level or not. They want to see that you can learn on the job by just doing it. Really, really important soft skill, and you're able actually to give examples throughout everything that you've done in Creative Commons about that. And responding to feedback in an open crit environment. Now, this is one of the big things that Skillset said that industry wanted, that you are somebody that's resilient, that you don't fall apart the second that somebody says, I didn't really like what you did. It didn't really make any sense. You could have worked harder. That visual needed to be better. This is the kind of feedback that you get in a kind of can be pretty unkind environment in the world of work. But they want to know that you can take it. Otherwise, they're not going to even employ you in the first place. You need to be able to be somebody that can present work verbally, visually. Maybe you're standing in front of a room and people will say, yeah, there's bits I like about that, except all of these other bits that I want you to change, and you need to be able to take that on board and not be really defensive and immediately start saying, well, actually, I did this, and I think you asked me to do that. They're not interested. But also, sometimes able to stand your ground. Well, I did these things because of these X reasons. And they go, oh, actually, now that you put it that way, that seems like a good idea. So finding a way to stand up for your ideas, but also accept feedback and change things as necessary. Key part of this is in this open crit environment, in an open environment. So in an office where they might say it in front of many, many co-workers, and not in an email to you on a personal level about your own feedback that gets hidden, in an open environment. So you experience this. You experience having to present work and me being able to say, well, this feels like it's actually quite a strong piece, but it needs to work in these ways, or this isn't as strong as it could be, kind of maybe feels like it's in the third area. In order to improve it, you need to do these things. Obviously, in a work environment, they wouldn't say in order to improve it, you need to do these things, and it feels like a third. They would just say, I'm going to go with so-and-so's idea, or come back to me having improved it. But, you're at university, clearly not in a job with this, but that experience of being able to stand there and take the feedback and then go away and do something about it is really, really important for you going into this sector. And finally, university skills. You're going through 3 years of university and this is just your first year. And so you need to acquire some skills which are different to school skills. Some of them are the same, like I've put up attendance and punctuality first of all. That's the same as school. And this is something that we want to see at university as well. And then we get asked for in your references. Please be under no illusion that they ask us in a reference what your attendance and punctuality was like. And by law, we have to tell them 80%, 70%. Punctuality was 100% on the times when they attended, which was only 50% of the time. We have to tell them by law. Much as we might like you, we're not allowed to say, yeah, they were good at attendance and punctuality. We have to say what it actually was. We can't hide it. Completing work to a deadline, important for all your university projects because you have hand-in dates. And then work is capped if you don't hand it in on time. So you might have done lots and lots of really great work. You hand it in 5 minutes late, it gets capped at 40%. And so learning this early on is really important. Working within the online Moodle environment, all of your courses, all of your modules are going to be have lots of resources on Moodle, have lots of hand-ins on Moodle, have all of your briefs and their details up on Moodle. You have to learn how to negotiate that, you're responsible for going onto it and having a look through it. It's not our job to show you Moodle each week. I do it because I want you to get into the habit of doing it, but there's no requirement for us to do it because you're adult learners. So you have to habituate yourselves and take some responsibility for working within that online Moodle environment. Like I've always said, we don't put things on it for the good of our own health or because we want to spend our lives on Moodle. We just do it for you, so please make the most of it. Using Harvard referencing. Now, I've tried to get you to do it a few times, and certainly in this report, you've had to learn how to do it, but it's key to any academic paper that you have to hand in. And if you don't Harvard reference properly, you'll lose a whole section of marks. And you could have written the best essay in the world, and you'll lose 20% of your grading, which it's not just that it moves you from a first down to a 2-1. This can move you from a first to a 2-2. Or if you're just in a 2-1, how about you start getting a third? And this is not where you want to be just because you didn't Harvard reference properly. Using Studiosity, really, really brilliant resource for you guys. Get into the habit of using Studiosity. And those of you that want even more help, use Academic Skills. Fantastic. You can book in an hour with these Academic Skills people who are brilliant. And actually, I've had a couple of them coming and talking in the STEPS events and induction weeks, and they are very funny. So it's not just that they are able to help you. You actually might find it quite entertaining being with them and learning how to improve your essays and your reflections and all of that kind of thing. And then send the work. So once they've maybe helped you get the structure of something right and the general argument right, then you can send these things to Studiosity to be read so that your formal writing improves. And then everything that you will show to future employers, everything that you'll hand in to get marked will be at the highest quality it can be. Reflecting on your own work. Lots and lots of the modules ask for reflections. Certainly advanced projects will ask for a big reflection on your own work. So if you do advanced projects instead of dissertations, but lots of things will ask for it, and you have to be able to reflect on it. It's a big part of the soft skills that people want, but it's a big university skill as well. You're not going to get decent marks if you can't reflect on it. Taking on board feedback, like I've said, it's a big soft skill, massive thing for industry, but also it's a big thing for the university, because if you don't take on the feedback, if you don't take on the fact that we might have said, you really need to go to Academic Skills and Studiosity because your formal writing isn't as strong as it could be, and then you don't do it, you don't take on board the feedback, you're not helping yourself in any way. You know, we don't say these things because we find them entertaining to say. We say them so that so you can feed it forward and apply it to your next project. Working with others, really important university skill, because lots and lots of the different modules ask for group work. So learning how to be able to work in groups and negotiate all the difficulties within that is going to be an important thing going into the second year and the third year. And ultimately showing respect to your classmates and those on other degrees, so to your peers, to the admin staff here and everybody working within the library, because everybody's trying to help you, and to your academic staff, turning up, doing things when they've asked you to do. Turning up is key, because I'm very grateful that you've all turned up for me pretty consistently, and I'm hoping you've done that as much because you've enjoyed the information as anything else. But it's a way of showing respect to your academic staff, that you turn up and you do the work, and you acknowledge the fact that they've put in a lot of effort working out whatever lectures they're going to give you and whatever seminars that they're going to, or workshops they're going to get you to do. So kind of respecting them by turning up and handing things in on time and responding to emails and all of these other things, really important. So hopefully this has helped you I know it's not the most exciting of presentations, but hopefully this has helped you in some way think about how you can write those reflections that you've got to write for each of the projects that I set you for Creative Comms that have to be in your sketchbook, and also how to identify these skills that you've learned during Creative Comms so that you can talk about them when you go for work placements. Really important, because that's the way that you're going to convince somebody that you're the person out of all of those other people that they're seeing to give you a chance within their organisation.